Good evening, dear friends, and welcome to something truly special. Welcome to Ghost Week. That's right, all this week we are setting aside the ordinary, stepping away from the bright and the familiar, and walking together into the shadows. Every single night this week we will be exploring the paranormal stories of things that should not exist, and yet somehow undeniably do. Tonight we begin where all ghost stories must begin. We begin with the ones who linger, the ones who refuse to simply go. Tonight we talk about ghosts. So I want you to do something for me right now. Find yourself a comfortable spot. Maybe you're curled up in your favorite chair with a warm blanket pulled around your shoulders. Maybe the house is quiet, the lights are dim, and the only sound is the soft hum of the night settling in around you. Good. Stay right there. Because the stories I'm about to share with you tonight are not the kind you want to hear standing up. They are the kind that settle deep into your chest, that make you glance over your shoulder when you think no one is watching, that make you wonder, just for a moment, whether the things we cannot see are perhaps not so far away after all. These are real accounts, real experiences shared by real people who found themselves standing at the edge of something they could not explain. Some of these stories are terrifying, some are heartbreaking, and these are perhaps the most powerful ones of all, are filled with a strange, quiet kind of comfort. Because sometimes the unknown does not come to frighten us. Sometimes it comes to say goodbye. So take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let the warmth of wherever you are wrap around you like a shield. And then let the darkness take control. If you are here with us for the very first time, welcome to the family. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single story. We are so glad you found your way here. Now let's begin. Our very first story tonight comes from someone who was, by their own admission, very deeply close to their grandmother. Not just close in the way that most people love their grandparents, but truly, genuinely close. The kind of closeness that is built over years of shared afternoons, of quiet conversations, of simply being present with one another. Especially in her later years, they spent many days together. And that kind of bond, as anyone who has ever shared it knows, does not simply disappear when one of the two people involved leaves the world. But life has a way of pulling us apart from the people we love, even when we do not want it to. This person had gone abroad for 6 months, 6 long months away. And in the cruelest of timing, the kind of timing that life sometimes delivers with no warning and no mercy, their grandmother passed away just 1 week before they were scheduled to come home. 1 single week, 7 days shy of making it back in time. The grief of that alone is something most of us can feel in our bones, the weight of arriving just too late, the door already closed, the goodbye never said. Now the narrator wants to be very clear about something important right from the start. What you are about to hear is not something they personally witnessed. This encounter belongs entirely to their sister and her husband. But both of them, to this day, will look you in the eye and tell you without hesitation this happened. This was real. Upon returning to the country, the narrator spent their very first night back inside their late grandmother's house. They arrived at around 2 in the morning. The airport happened to be closer to their grandmother's place than to their own home, and so that is where they went, back to that familiar house, full of familiar smells and familiar silence, now carrying the particular stillness of a place where someone has recently been lost. Their sister, her husband, and their little baby were already there, staying at the house as well. They had come to town for the funeral, and here is a detail worth noting: the funeral service itself had already taken place by the time the narrator arrived. But the burial had been intentionally delayed. It had been held off so that they could be there to say a proper farewell. Someone had made sure of that. Someone had made sure that even in grief, the family would be together. The narrator had been traveling for over 24 hours straight by the time they walked through that front door. More than a full day of airports and layovers and planes and exhaustion and grief, all layered on top of each other. And so the moment they stepped inside and climbed the stairs, they collapsed into bed and slept deeply, dreamlessly, well into the afternoon the next day. Now let me paint you a picture of the upstairs of this house. At the top of the staircase, there were 2 bedrooms, one on either side of the stairwell, and one more straight down the hall ahead of you. The sister and her husband and the baby were staying in the room to the left of the stairs. The narrator was in the room at the end of the hall, the furthest one, straight ahead. When they finally emerged the following afternoon, their brother-in-law made an offhand comment. He said he was surprised they were up so early. The narrator was confused. Early? They had slept for hours. They had not left the bedroom even once since arriving. The brother-in-law frowned. He said he had heard someone downstairs moving things around in the kitchen. His wife, the narrator's sister, had been right there in bed beside him, so he had simply assumed it must have been the narrator, awake and getting something to eat. The narrator brushed it off. It was an old house after all. Old houses breathe. Old houses shift and creak and murmur to themselves in the night. It did not seem worth worrying about. But then the sister spoke up, and what she said changed the whole texture of the morning. She said that something strange had also happened to her that same morning, and that maybe, just maybe, what her husband heard downstairs and what she experienced upstairs were connected. Connected by something that should not have been there, or perhaps by something that had every right in the world to be. The narrator asked what she meant, because the sister had never seemed like someone who believed in ghosts, not even slightly. The sister explained. Early that morning, she had woken up to feed the baby, the way new mothers do, half asleep and operating on pure instinct, dragging themselves up in the dark to care for the little one. And while she was awake in those quiet, dark hours, she heard something, a sound like footsteps, someone walking in the hallway outside the bedroom door. Her first thought was the same as her husband's. It must be the narrator, finally awake, moving through the house. And so she opened the door to go out and greet them. She had not seen her sibling in 6 months. Even in her sleepy state, she wanted to say hello. But there was no one in the hallway. What she saw instead was a soft, shadowy light. A gentle, glowing shape moving slowly and quietly down the length of the hallway, moving with a kind of unhurried, peaceful purpose. Moving toward the room at the end of the hall, the room where the narrator lay sleeping. And then it was gone. The narrator listened to this story and felt something shift inside their chest, something tight and tender and full of feeling. They looked at their sister and said quietly that it was probably their grandmother, coming back to say goodbye. There is a reason this goodbye mattered so much. The last time the narrator had seen their grandmother while she was alive, truly alive, not just surviving, had been a painful visit. They had come home from overseas for the holidays and gone to see her in the hospital, and it had been very rough. The details are kept private, as well they should be, but the memory of that visit was not one they would choose to carry as a final image of someone they loved so deeply. And so here is the thing. Whether what the sister saw was real or imagined, whether there was truly a soft light moving through that hallway in the early hours of the morning, or whether she was half dreaming and seeing shapes in the darkness, the narrator has chosen to believe it. They have made that choice deliberately with full awareness, because the alternative is that their last memory of their grandmother is a hospital room and suffering, and they would rather carry something gentler than that. They would rather believe that she came back, one final time, soft as light, to find them sleeping safely in her house and say the goodbye that life had not given them the chance to exchange in person. After the burial, the narrator returned to their own home, but the sister and her husband stayed on at the grandmother's house for a few more days, and they reported nothing further. No more sounds in the kitchen, no more shadowy light in the hallway. Whatever presence had been there, if it had ever truly been there at all, was gone. The house was sold not long after, and the narrator never had the chance to go back. This happened about 12 years ago, and it is only now that this story is finally being shared. Somehow that feels right. Some stories need time before they are ready to be told. If you have ever had a moment like this, a moment where you felt sure that someone you loved was still nearby, still watching, still with you even after they were gone, please share it with us in the comments below. You are not alone. More of us have had these moments than you might imagine, and there is something deeply powerful about speaking them aloud. Our next story takes us to the year 2013. The person sharing this was 23 years old at the time, living in a new town, male, and by his own cheerful admission, in what he describes as the MVP season of his drinking career, meaning that at this point in his life, a few drinks barely registered. This detail matters, and he brings it up himself because he wants you to understand from the beginning that what he saw cannot be explained away by an unsteady mind or blurry vision. Through his brother, he had inherited a friendship with someone who worked at a bar and restaurant in the city center, one of those warm, lively, beloved establishments that somehow becomes the center of a social world. He and this friend hit it off immediately. He became a regular. He got to know the other servers. He would stay after hours, sit at the bar, and enjoy the atmosphere of a place that felt genuinely alive with history and character. And it was genuinely, deeply old. This building was believed to be the oldest in the entire area or very close to it. It had 3 levels, the main floor at street level, a basement level that was described as wonderfully rustic and full of atmosphere, which was where our narrator spent most of his time, and then a deeper sub-basement that served as storage and was never open to the public. He had never been down there, and he never had any particular desire to go. The basement bar, it turned out, had a fascinating history. Long before it was a bar, it had been a stable, the place where horses were kept, and carriages were stored back when that was how people moved through the world. Because the building sat on a hill, the basement could actually be accessed directly from the outside, which gave it a natural, almost organic connection to the world beyond its walls. Outside that basement level was a beer garden, a truly marvelous one, according to our narrator, the kind of outdoor space that becomes a destination in itself during the warmer months. But this story takes place in the early days of winter. The beer garden had been closed for about a week. The outdoor furniture was put away. The doors were locked. No one was supposed to be out there. The staff at this establishment had long accepted that strange things happened inside the building. Hanging lamps that swayed with no breeze, pool cues that slid off their racks on their own, internal phone calls that rang from offices that were completely vacant. The general policy was an unofficial but well-understood one. Acknowledge what happened, then carry on with your evening. You work in a very old building. Old buildings have memories. You learn to share the space. So on this particular Sunday evening, our narrator and his friend were settled downstairs at the bar, enjoying a quiet glass together. The basement had been closed to the public that night for some reason, so the two of them were entirely alone down there. His friend needed to go check on something, his schedule, his hours, some small practical errand, and told our narrator he would be right back. And so the narrator sat alone at the bar, in that old stone space that had once sheltered horses, with the beer garden beyond the glass door dark and locked and cold and still. He was doing nothing in particular, just glancing around, letting his eyes wander the way eyes do when you are comfortable and a little at ease with yourself. And his gaze drifted down the hallway toward the window in the door that led out to the beer garden. Through that glass he could see the outside space, dark, quiet, empty. And then someone walked past. A man, male, appeared to be around 30 years old, give or take. His head was tilted slightly downward the way a person's head tilts when they are walking with real purpose, really going somewhere, really focused on getting there. He moved across the window and the door at a brisk, confident pace. And he was extraordinarily, almost unnervingly pale, not just fair-skinned, not just washed out in the cold light. It was as if, in our narrator's own words, someone had dusted him entirely in baby powder. He was white in a way that human beings are not generally white. The narrator's first logical thought was perfectly reasonable. The beer garden had only recently closed. Maybe a staff member was out there doing some final tidying up, checking the furniture, locking the last gate. He watched the window, fully expecting to see this figure reappear, puttering around in the half-dark outside. He watched and watched. His friend came back downstairs and found him still staring at the door. The narrator described what he had just seen. His friend's expression shifted. They both went to investigate. They walked the entire beer garden. They checked every corner. All the doors were locked. There was not a single other person out there. There was something else, too, something the narrator only realized upon reflection. Just to the left of the door on the outside, there was a drinks dispenser machine. One of those large units where servers fill glasses with soft drinks. The placement of that machine meant that the angle at which the man appeared to walk, straight and parallel to the wall, moving cleanly past the glass, was actually geometrically impossible. In order to be walking the way he appeared to be walking, he would have had to cut a 45-degree angle toward the door first, and then pivot sharply. He would not have simply walked past. The physics of the space did not allow for it. They went back inside. They sat at the bar and worked through it together, discussing it, trying to construct an explanation that made sense. Another server came downstairs to say hello. The narrator, still unsettled, blurted out what he had seen. The server looked at him, gave a very deliberate hand gesture, the universal signal for absolutely not, I am not engaging with this, and quietly left. He had not been drunk. He remembers the entire evening with perfect clarity. Nothing else strange happened that night. He has never been entirely sure what he saw, but he leans very strongly in one particular direction, and after everything he has described, it is very difficult to argue with him. Our next account is a more recent one, set in an office building in Mataki. Back in 2024, the building had been formally blessed by a religious practitioner after multiple reports of paranormal activity on a specific floor. For a while, it seemed to have worked. Things quieted down. People went back to working late without thinking twice about it. The atmosphere settled. But lately, the experiences have started again, and several office workers have come forward to share what they have been going through. The first account belongs to a woman who was the very last person on her floor one evening in early January. It was around 8 o'clock at night. She had been experiencing small, nagging sensations for a while by that point, the kind that are easy to dismiss when you are surrounded by colleagues and the ordinary noise of a working day. Sounds that might be footsteps, the distant, rhythmic tapping of keys on a keyboard when no one is nearby. She had chosen to dismiss them. She was a practical person. She did not want to be the one who panicked over shadows. But that evening, alone on the floor as the building settled into nighttime silence, something happened that she could not dismiss. She heard a child laughing. Not across the room, not faint and far away, a few meters from where she was sitting. The clear, unmistakable sound of a child's laughter, light and bright and entirely, horribly wrong in that empty office space after dark. She left, and she never stayed late again. The second account comes from a woman who arrived at the office early one morning and from her desk had a direct line of sight to the glass panel beside the door of their division head's office. The door was closed. The lights inside were off. The room, as far as anyone knew, was empty. But seated in the chair across from the boss's desk, she could see a woman, just sitting there, still and quiet in the unlit room. Her first thought was that it must be their division head arriving early, but something about the scene felt wrong. The lights were off. Why would anyone sit in a dark office? She waited. When she saw her actual boss arrive later that morning, she asked whether there had been a meeting early in the day, perhaps someone waiting in the dark office. There had been no meeting. No visitors had been scheduled. The guard was called. His records confirmed that no one had entered that office that morning. No one at all. The third account is perhaps the most quietly unsettling of the three. A woman was walking toward the restroom, carrying a small piece of rubbish to throw away on her way. As she passed by the entrance to the bathroom, something in the corner of her vision made her aware of a shape inside. A woman standing in the dark restroom. Just standing there, still, facing the interior cubicles, in a room where the lights were completely off and there should have been no one. She did not go back to look, and really, when you think about it, would you? Now we move to a story that begins with a delayed flight and ends somewhere much stranger than any airport. A family, our narrator and their travel companion, arrived in a city in the very early hours of the morning. They had originally planned to land around 11:30, a reasonable enough hour. But delays had stacked up, one after another, the way delays do when you are tired and ready to be home, and by the time they touched down, it was nearly 1 in the morning. They did not want to wake any relatives at that hour. That felt like too much of an imposition, and so they decided to take a taxi from the airport. The luggage took what felt like an eternity to arrive, and when they finally made it outside to the taxi queue, they found it stretching impossibly long, the kind of line that makes your heart sink and your back ache all at once. One company told them the wait would be at least 40 minutes. They had already been traveling for hours. They were exhausted and irritable and desperately ready to be still. And then, just when they had accepted their fate and settled into wait, the line moved. A taxi became available. They hurried toward it. The driver was outside the car when they arrived, chatting casually with an employee near the entrance. Nothing about him seemed unusual. They got in, gave him the address, a house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense jungle, and the taxi pulled away into the quiet dark. Now, a word about that region. It carries its legends the way old places always do, not as quaint folklore meant to entertain tourists, but as genuine, deeply held belief passed down through generations. The people of that area speak of the Alouches, the little people. Small, strange beings said to inhabit the forests, the roadsides, and the forgotten, abandoned spaces between the living world and whatever lies just beyond it. Many people, ordinary, sober, sensible people, claim to have encountered them, almost always at night, almost always on roads like the one this taxi was now traveling. There was no traffic. It was nearly 2 in the morning. Of course there was no traffic. The streets were dark and open and completely empty, and for the first few minutes everything was simply quiet. But then our narrator began to notice something wrong. The taxi was drifting, not dramatically, not dangerously, but noticeably. The driver was weaving gently from side to side on the road, even on perfectly straight stretches, a zigzag that had no obvious cause. At first, they wondered if he was distracted by his phone, checking a message, glancing away for a moment. And then a different, darker possibility occurred to them. They spoke up, asked carefully whether everything was all right, mentioned that the driving felt a little unsteady. The driver responded that he was checking the route on his phone because his car's screen was not working. A reasonable explanation, technically, but it did not fully account for the drifting, and it did not reassure them. The weaving continued. Our narrator began to wonder if the driver was fighting to stay awake. They kept speaking to him at intervals, just to make sure he was responsive, just to keep him anchored to the present moment. At one point, the worry became too strong to stay polite about, and they asked directly, was he falling asleep? No, no, he said quickly, he was fine. To fill the silence and to keep the driver talking, our narrator decided to make conversation. They asked about the road, whether strange things ever happened around here. Ghosts, perhaps, anything like that. He answered without a moment's hesitation. There are. He explained the local belief carefully, without drama, as though describing something as ordinary as the weather. On these roads at night, he said, it is not wise to look too long at the sides. People from this area say that if you let your eyes linger in the wrong direction, you can see wandering souls, spirits who have not found their way to wherever they are meant to go. And if those souls see you looking at them, they can take you with them into wherever they are. As the taxi passed into a section of the road, flanked on both sides by ancient stone walls and trees so thick they blocked the sky entirely, the driver lowered his voice and told them something that had happened to him personally. He had been driving late at night, he said. 2 passengers heading to a house in an isolated area not unlike this one. He dropped them off, watched them go inside, turned back toward the road. And in his rearview mirror, there was someone in the back seat. He had not heard the door open, had not felt the car shift. The passengers had gone inside and he had been alone, and now, without explanation, he was not. He asked where the person was going, no answer. In the mirror, he could make out the shape of a young man, thin, dark hair falling to his shoulders, just sitting there in absolute silence, staring at the back of the driver's head. Staring, not blinking, not speaking, not moving. The driver kept driving. He made a decision. He would get to a well-lit area. He would stop under bright lights and deal with this then. When he finally reached a street that was properly illuminated and pulled over, he turned around to face the back seat. It was empty. He sat alone in his car under the street lights and understood, with the kind of certainty that settles into a person's bones and never quite leaves again, exactly what those roads were capable of. Exactly what the old warnings had been trying to protect people from all along. Do not look, do not invite it, do not let it know you have noticed it. Our narrator sat in the front seat, a chill running straight through them, unable to respond for a moment. The driver had told that story without performance, without embellishment, just plain, quiet fact. And then, almost at their destination, something caught their eye. In the middle of the road, directly ahead, there was an object. A large, pale, box-shaped thing sitting squarely in the center of the lane. It had no clear edges, no obvious explanation for why it would be there. It did not look like a stone. It did not look like something dropped by accident. It simply sat there, solid and wrong. Their companions saw it too. The driver passed by it without a word, without touching it, and the car continued on in silence. Minutes later, they arrived at the house. The driver left quickly, barely saying goodbye. And thinking about it now, our narrator cannot blame him. After all he had already told them, the very last thing he would have wanted was to sit still long enough for something to climb into his back seat again. The trip ended there, but even now, whenever the memory of that night surfaces, that dark road, that pale shape on the asphalt, that story told in a lowered voice through a tunnel of darkness, there is always the same quiet thought underneath it all. How easy it would be to bring something home with you. How easy, on a road like that, to carry something back from the dark without ever realizing you had. Like this story so far? Give it a like and share it with a friend who loves a good ghost story. It means the world to us, and it helps more people find their way to our little community here. Our next story is one the narrator is very clear about from the very start. This is not a rumor. This is not something they heard secondhand. This is something they lived, something they experienced firsthand as a child in the house where they grew up. Before their stepmother died, two presences shared that house with them. One was a woman, glowing softly in white, who felt calm, protective, even like a quiet guardian standing between the family and something unnamed. The other was a shapeless black mass, dark and heavy and entirely different in nature. The dark thing never touched our narrator, but as they would eventually learn, it was far from passive with their stepmother. The narrator was born in Alaska, though home was never quite the right word for any single place. Their father was in the military, and the family moved constantly. The earliest memories that stuck were set in North Carolina, on Pope Air Force Base, flat, unremarkable land that nevertheless held the particular magic of early childhood. When their parents divorced, they stayed with their mother. Their father remarried quickly. The new stepmother was pale and physically fragile, in and out of the hospital with frightening regularity. A feeding tube curled from her chest, an anchor that seemed to keep her tethered somewhere between this world and another. She was a gentle presence, but a haunted one. And it was not long after she moved into the house that the nights began to feel different. The first encounter came late at night. The narrator, young, small, entirely unprepared, had slipped out of bed to get a glass of water from the kitchen. Coming back up the stairs, glass in hand, they stopped dead at the landing. Standing just beyond the banister, stepping out of the narrator's own bedroom, a woman in flowing white, glowing with a soft, faint light that had no source. She did not look at the child on the stairs. She drifted, unhurried and serene, across the hall and into the sister's room and disappeared. The glass trembled in a small hand. The narrator could not call out, could not move. They spent the rest of that night downstairs, curled up in the relative safety of the lower floor, waiting for morning. When they told the family the next day, they were told it had been a dream, a nightmare. Children dream vivid things, and how desperately this child wanted to believe that. But weeks later, she appeared again, this time passing directly in front of the bedroom door. This time there was no fear, just a strange kind of recognition. And she kept appearing every so often with a quiet regularity until the family moved to Texas. For months in the new house, everything was still. Normal, nothing happened. And then one night the narrator woke up with the absolute, unmistakable certainty of being watched. It was not the woman in white. It was something else entirely. A tall shape standing in the room, darker than the surrounding darkness. Its edges did not hold still. They shifted and rolled like smoke, like something that had not quite decided on a solid form. It was shadow given weight. It was stillness that felt like coiled attention. It did not speak, it did not move, and after a while it was simply gone. From then on, the nights fell into an irregular, unsettling rhythm. Sometimes the lady in white, sometimes the dark shape, sometimes neither. But they were never both present at the same time. Never. As though something, some rule, some understanding kept them apart. As the stepmother's health grew worse, the visits from the shadow became more frequent. It began to linger in doorways. It took up residence in corners of rooms, still and patient, watching. The narrator was a child and did not know then what it was capable of. Their stepmother died when the narrator was 8 years old, and after that both presences were gone. The house was simply a house again. Years passed, and when the narrator, now an adult, finally spoke to their sister about all of this, the sister went very quiet. Then she admitted that she too had seen them in both houses, Texas and North Carolina both. She had been told explicitly to say nothing about it at the time. The family had not wanted the child frightened. And then she told the narrator something that made the skin crawl. The shadow had never appeared when the woman in white was present. Never once. The two presences existed in the same house without ever occupying the same space or the same moment, as if one was holding the other back. When the narrator finally confronted their father, expecting denial, expecting dismissal, they got neither. He confirmed it all. He told them that both figures had been attached to their stepmother long before the marriage. They had followed her. And he told them something the narrator had never personally witnessed, what the dark mass had actually been doing to her. How it would throw her physically against walls, how it would press her down into her bed with an invisible force, how sometimes, when she was at her most vulnerable, it would strike her hard enough to leave marks on her body, marks with no visible cause. The woman in white, the narrator came to believe, had been standing guard. a barrier between their stepmother and the thing that tormented her. A soft, patient protector doing everything in its power to hold the darkness at bay. But barriers, even the most devoted ones, have limits, and in the darkest hours of the night, when the memories of that time come back, the narrator cannot shake the thought that the shadow was simply waiting, patient as stone, waiting for the moment when the protection would falter, when the fragile light would dim just enough to let it in completely. Perhaps the illness alone did not take her. Perhaps something darker and older was woven into the ending. Perhaps that shadow was not just a witness to her suffering. Perhaps it was the cause. Her sister still lives in that house in Texas. She says it has been completely quiet ever since. Now we travel to the Myrtles plantation in Louisiana, and this story was shared just recently, on December 29th of 2025, which means this is an experience still fresh and vivid in the narrator's mind. The Myrtles plantation is one of those places that carries its history openly, makes no apologies for it, and practically dares you to walk through its rooms and come out unchanged. It is beautiful, it is old, and it is, by most accounts, extraordinarily haunted. Our narrator is young, passionate about photography, and arrived for a self-guided tour armed with both a Canon camera and an older Olympus as a backup. The tour began in the one-bedroom on the first floor that was open to visitors, the room that contains the infamous mirror. The mirror at the Myrtles is legendary. Guests and staff over the years have reported seeing figures in it that were not physically present. Dark shapes, faces, hands pressed against the glass from the other side. Our narrator spent considerable time photographing it with their Canon, patient and methodical, moving carefully around the frame. Later, reviewing the shots, they saw them. Dark shapes in several of the photographs. Shapes that had not been there when they were standing in front of the mirror. Figures that existed only in the captured image, not in the room itself. After that, they switched to the older Olympus camera. And the battery, which had been fully charged the night before, topped up deliberately in preparation for the day, was almost completely dead. They continued exploring the first floor, the upstairs being off-limits to daytime visitors as it served as guest accommodations. Eventually, they drifted back toward the main hall near the front entrance. And then something small and sharp and undeniable happened. A click right beside their ear. They looked down. One of their earrings was lying on the floor. And instantly, a name came to mind. Chloe, the most famous ghost of the Myrtles, the spirit most associated with this place, most often encountered, most deeply woven into its terrible history. Chloe was an enslaved woman who, according to the account that has survived through the decades, used to press herself close to doors and walls and listen to the conversations of the men in the parlor, trying desperately to understand the world that controlled her, trying to learn how to survive it, how to make herself useful, how to protect herself from the cruelties that could come at any moment. When she was discovered listening, they cut off her left ear as punishment. They made her wear a green turban every day after that to hide what had been done to her. And the spirit known as Chloe is said, to this day, to reach out and take dangling earrings from visitors, specifically from the left ear, the ear she lost. The narrator's earring had fallen from the right ear, but, as they quickly pointed out, their left ear was covered by their headphones, so perhaps Chloe had simply reached for what she could reach. The headphones, it turned out, played a significant role in the day's events. During the tour, visitors are given small audio devices, little handheld things that scan plaques beside objects in each room and play historical information about them. The narrator had done their research beforehand and did not use the device much, simply hanging it around their neck. Inside the bedroom, they had their own music playing through their headphones. They were absorbed in photographing the mirror. Their father was with them, and at one point he asked, casually, curiously, whether they were planning to listen to the tour device. Confused, the narrator removed their headphones and held the device up to their ear. It was playing an audio segment about a dress laid out on the bed in that room, quietly, steadily, describing it in detail. The narrator had not scanned a single thing in that room. They had not gone near any of the plaques. They had walked straight to the mirror and stayed there. Later, in the men's parlor, the very room where Chloe had once been caught listening, someone began chatting with them about the earring incident. The narrator joked that they were putting their headphones back on so Chloe could not take any more. They powered the headphones completely down. definitely off, and then slid them back over their ears. Music began playing immediately, on their own, from headphones that had just been powered down. A small group had gathered in the parlor by this point, 10, 15 people, maybe more. Another young woman had been watching what was happening and told the narrator she had been about to warn some other guests with dangly earrings based on what she had seen earlier. Everyone in the room looked at the narrator, and so the whole story came out. The earring, the photographs, the mirror, the headphones, and Chloe herself. Her history, the ear, the green turban, and why she takes what she takes. One young man stood listening with an expression of pure, stunned disbelief, like someone who has just seen something they cannot yet process. When the narrator explained the history, what had actually been done to Chloe, and why she reaches for earrings, the room went still. Someone asked that actually happened. It had. When the narrator arrived home that evening, they began going through the photographs on the older Olympus. Entire groups of shots were simply missing, gone. The camera showed them as not existing. They called a friend, showed them the battery indicator on the camera screen. It was full, green, charged. The friend saw it clearly. A minute later, they looked again. The battery had dropped nearly to zero and was flashing red. Their friend watched it happen in real time, sitting right there beside them. Both of them sat with their hearts pounding, watching a fully charged battery drain to nothing in the space of 60 seconds with the camera off and sitting still on the table. Some researchers of the paranormal suggest that spirits use electromagnetic energy to make themselves felt. That camera batteries and phone batteries draining without cause is a sign of something drawing power from the technology nearby, using it as fuel. The battery in the Olympus had been low inside the house. It had been low when the earring fell. Now back home it was draining again, as though whatever had taken an interest in this visitor at the Myrtles had not entirely stayed behind. The narrator's verdict on the whole extraordinary day? They loved it. They would go back. The Myrtles plantation is a place of genuine beauty and genuinely dark history, and for those who are open to it, it gives back exactly what it seems to promise when you walk through the door. Our next story is about a car, or rather it is about what followed a car home. From the moment a mutual friend first met the woman at the center of this story, she had always said the same thing with a kind of tired, resigned acceptance. Her car was cursed. Not as a running joke exactly. More as an established fact of her life, the way some people accept that they always lose umbrellas or that technology breaks in their hands. Every week, something was wrong with the car. The battery, the brakes, the engine, noises that had no explanation. Mechanics would examine it, find nothing wrong, hand back the keys, and within days something new would fail. One afternoon, a mutual friend agreed to ride along with her somewhere. She settled into the passenger seat and immediately felt something she could not put into words, a quality to the air inside the car. Stagnant, thick, like air that had been breathed too many times and never refreshed. She checked the mirror. She checked the back seat. Nothing there. She asked, only half joking, "Have you ever felt like we're not going alone?" The driver was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, yes, many times, but she preferred not to think about it. The explanation came days later. Some time before, she had been driving alone on a quiet highway at night when she saw emergency lights ahead. A genuine accident. Police cars, people standing at the roadside, the whole terrible tableau of a collision. And there, partially covered on the asphalt, a person who had not survived. As she drove past, she turned her head. Not out of morbid curiosity, she said afterward, or at least not only that. It felt somehow like she was made to look, like something had turned her head for her. The moment she did, a deep physical shiver ran through her and the car shut off. Just switched itself off completely. Then came back on by itself like nothing had happened. From that night forward, the strange experiences began. Doors jammed for no reason. The radio switched on by itself. And always, persistently, that feeling of another presence in the car, something sharing the space. She sought help. Someone she trusted suggested she speak with a person who understood these things. She did, and that person listened carefully and then was very direct. She needed a cleansing, not of herself, of the car. The medium came on a cloudy afternoon and asked for no information, no context, no history. She simply walked around the vehicle slowly, moved her hands over the doors, over the hood. And then she spoke. It was not the accident itself that caused this. It was the moment you looked at the dead person. Something followed you, not you personally, the car. According to the medium, the spirit had not left because it genuinely did not understand that it had died. It had gotten into the vehicle the way any living person might, looking for a ride, looking to continue a journey, unaware that the journey it was on was one it could not complete. After the cleansing, the car stopped breaking down. The stagnant feeling lifted from the air inside it. The doors worked normally. The radio stayed off. But there is one habit the driver never abandoned. Every time she drives alone on the highway, she places something on the passenger seat beside her. A backpack, a bag, any solid object. She leaves it there as a placeholder, a presence, a way of telling any wandering soul that the seat is already taken, that there is no space here, that she is not traveling alone. She does not want to pick up another passenger, not one she cannot see. This next story was shared by someone who was 9 years old when it happened, in 2009. A sleepover, one of those gloriously chaotic childhood events, pizza and video games and mattresses dragged across floors, and the particular magic of staying up past the point where your body can really keep up. Our narrator and his school friends had an excellent evening. They played games on the PS2, made a wonderfully spectacular mess of the living room, ate their fill, and eventually migrated to the bedroom where 4 mattresses had been laid out alongside the 2 beds. One by one, they fell asleep. The narrator was the last one awake, reading a Batman comic by the low, warm light of a desk lamp, keeping himself company in the quiet. He finished reading, reached over and turned the lamp off, and in the sudden darkness, saw something he could not immediately process. A shadowy figure, the shape of an adult man, crouching on the floor in front of him. The narrator's first instinct was the rational one, a trick of the dark, a shape created by shadows and imagination, the kind of thing a child's mind conjures after a long, exciting day. He watched it, waiting for it to resolve into furniture or a pile of clothes or something ordinary. And then it extended an arm. The dark figure reached out slowly and deliberately toward one of the sleeping boys, toward Nico. The arm extended toward the sleeping child, and what followed, and this is perhaps the strangest part, appeared to be a gentle gesture, not threatening, not violent. The shadow seemed to be caressing the sleeping boy with the careful tenderness of someone who cares very much. And then it simply imploded, slowly, silently, folding inward on itself until it was gone. Our narrator lay completely still for a very long time. He did not run. He did not cry out. He was afraid that if he moved, the attention of the shadow would shift to him. And so he lay there in the dark, rigid with fear and adrenaline, until his exhausted body eventually made the decision for him and dragged him into sleep. The morning was bright and ordinary and full of cereal and Lego Star Wars on the very first level. The pod racing 1, notoriously one of the most frustratingly difficult levels in the entire game, as anyone who played it will remember with great feeling. And the boys took turns with the controller, each of them trying to be the one who finally broke through. The narrator told his friends what he had seen in the night. When he told Nico specifically, the boy paused and said that yes, actually, he had felt something brush against him during the night. Something had touched him gently and he had noticed it, been briefly awake, and then gone back to sleep without thinking much of it. Not long after, Nico's mother arrived to collect him early. The narrator's mother explained the reason later. That night, Nico's grandfather had passed away. Standing in that dining room, cereal going soggy in the bowl, the pieces came together quietly. A grandfather looking one last time at his sleeping grandchild, reaching out with the only means available to him now, a gentle touch in the dark, a goodbye that the sleeping boy barely felt, and then gone. It was frightening, yes. For a 9-year-old in the dark, it was absolutely terrifying. But looking back now, with the eyes of an adult who understands what love looks like when it refuses to leave without saying goodbye, it was also, in its own quiet way, deeply beautiful. What do you think? Have you ever had an experience like this one? A moment where something that frightened you turned out to be, at its heart, an act of love? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. In 2009, a student at Glenville State College in West Virginia found herself at the center of one of the more physically dramatic encounters in tonight's collection. Glenville State is a small campus, perched on a hill, and it carries its haunted reputation openly. There is an actual cemetery on the grounds, and more than enough stories about classrooms and dormitories that feel occupied after hours to give any sensitive visitor pause. Right before Halloween that year, a paranormal investigation group came to campus to run ghost tour. Our narrator was on the cheer team, and 4 teammates decided to go together. They paired up. Our narrator locked arms with one teammate, while their other 2 friends stayed close ahead. The group was led into Clark Hall, a large building at the top of the hill. For the investigation, everything was shut down entirely. Breaker off. Windows closed. No air conditioning, no fans. Complete darkness and complete stillness, with only the sound of footsteps and the paranormal crew's voices to fill the silence. Somewhere on the stairs leading toward the second floor, something happened that is difficult to fully explain. Our narrator and her partner were right behind their 2 teammates. She could see the flash of light blonde hair just ahead of them. They never unlinked arms. They never stopped moving. And yet, at some point, they realized their friends were simply no longer there. They had been separated without knowing how or when. They decided to slip out and find their original group. At the end of the hallway was a heavy, dark wooden door, old wood, solid as history, with a small glass pane near the top. When they reached it, the door was standing open. Nothing in the building was moving. No air, no breeze, no fans. The building was an absolute vacuum of stillness. That door flew toward them, slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot, and began rattling hard in its frame, shaking violently back and forth, as though something on the other side had braced both hands against it and was determined not to let them through. They froze, gripped each other's arms. And then our narrator did something that takes real presence of mind in a moment like that. She spoke aloud to whatever was on the other side. She asked, calmly and directly, to please be allowed through. She explained that they were just trying to get back to their group. The rattling stopped immediately. She tried the handle, the door opened. Without resistance, as smoothly and normally as any door, as though nothing had ever happened. They hurried through and found their group further down the corridor, still taking photographs, entirely unaware. When the narrator mentioned the slamming door, her teammates said they had not heard a thing. Later, as the tour moved toward the campus cemetery and the group walked along a clear, well-lit path, something grabbed at the narrator's ankle. Her right foot buckled, caught on something invisible, and she went down hard, pain shooting through her leg. There was nothing on the ground to explain the fall. No stone, no root, no crack in the path, nothing. She had refractured an old injury, the same ankle she had broken years earlier while running track. Her cheerleading flyer ended up carrying her back to the dormitory on her back. Looking back now, with years and more awareness between herself and that night, the narrator says the sensation at that door felt like something specific. Like an older woman, drawing herself up to her full height, planting herself squarely in the doorway and saying, firmly, finally, with absolute conviction, turn around. Go back. This is not for you. She has never forgotten how that felt, and she never will. The next story comes from someone who grew up in a house with genuine historical weight. Built in the 1890s, this home had originally served as a train station before being converted into a residence, which means its bones are older than even 135 years would suggest. 2 deaths had occurred within its walls, both documented. One a suspected poisoning, one a self-inflicted end. And the house had given its various inhabitants, across the decades, ample reason to believe those deaths had not fully released the building from their presence. Our narrator was around 4 years old when their first encounter happened. They and their 2 lifelong best friends were playing upstairs in the hallway, gathered around a little toy kitchen set. The hallway configuration was particular. At the top of the stairs, a sharp right turn brought you to the narrator's door, a left turn to the playroom, and a right to the father's door. The kitchen set sat along the wall nearest the father's door. During play, the youngest of the 3 friends, a girl named Lydia, accidentally knocked a small toy lemon, which rolled through the open playroom door and disappeared inside. The narrator went to retrieve it, stepped into the doorway, and stopped. They were paralyzed, not frozen by fear exactly, but genuinely, physically unable to move, as if the space itself had taken hold of them. They could move only their eyes, and slowly, forming itself out of the air in front of them, a full apparition materialized. A man wearing a suit, a hat, a severe expression, and a mustache that matched old photographs of the house's former owner, a man named Mr. Ruppel, who was believed to have died of poison in this very building. The apparition took its time. It appeared slowly, held its form, and then dissolved just as gradually back into the ordinary air of the room. The narrator retrieved the lemon, placed it carefully on the counter of the toy kitchen, and walked very quickly to the top of the stairs, and then ran all the way down, screaming. This was not their only experience in that house. Over the years, they also saw, briefly, in passing, what appeared to be the spirit of their mother's late sister, a woman said by the family to be a guardian angel who had on one occasion intervened to prevent a nearly fatal car accident. And once, glimpsed for only a split second, a woman who seemed to be perpetually walking behind the couch, moving toward the small hallway between the sofa and the basement door, over and over, on a path that only she could see, heading toward somewhere that only she knew. Our next account comes from someone who recently moved into a 200-year-old house on a former Army fort in South Dakota, where their father works as a firefighter. The narrator is open, honest, and slightly bemused about the whole situation. They have never been a believer in the paranormal, and yet the experiences have been piling up ever since they arrived. Before the family moved in, the father was at the house alone, waiting for the woman who would show him around. He needed to use the bathroom and ducked inside. While he was in there, he heard the front door open, the clear, unmistakable sound of someone entering. He quickly finished up and went out to greet whoever it was. The house was empty. Then he heard footsteps on the stairs, not gentle, uncertain steps stomping. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the far staircase, the one furthest from where he was standing. He ran toward the sound. Nothing there. Shortly afterward, the grandfather came to help move boxes and furniture into the house. He drive. Car that can be remote started, but only when the driver is physically inside the vehicle. That's the key feature of this particular car. You cannot start it remotely from outside. The grandfather and the father were both standing outside the car, having a conversation, when the engine roared on. By itself, aggressively, without warning. The father laughed and said, half joking, "All right, I see you, ghost. Leave us alone." The engine shut off immediately. And then the narrator's own experience. In their room on the top floor, essentially the attic space converted to a bedroom, they were watching television one evening when the door handle turned and the door swung open. They waited for someone to walk in. No one did. They went to the hallway. The closest other person in the house was 2 full floors below them. Our next story involves a spirit box, one of those electronic devices used by paranormal investigators that cycles through radio frequencies rapidly and is believed by some to allow spirits to manipulate the sound to form words and phrases. Whether you believe in such things or not, what happened in this story is difficult to dismiss. A group of friends were staying at an old mansion for a birthday party. One of them brought the spirit box. Our narrator agreed to serve as the translator, the person who listens carefully to what comes through and attempts to interpret it. They figured it would be fun. They did not expect anything serious. They began in the room reported to be haunted by a woman associated with the mirror. As soon as the box was up and running, the door they had entered through began rattling violently, the same kind of rattling we have heard about already tonight, the kind that has no physical cause. They threw the door open. No one was there. Later, they confirmed that everyone who should have been inside the house had actually gone outdoors. They checked the adjacent rooms. They ran down the stairs. Nobody. They went back to the room. The rattling happened again. The spirit box, meanwhile, was speaking, and what it said was specific, the birthday friend's name over and over, and names connected to the history of the house itself. In the basement, a soap dispenser flew off a shelf with no one standing near it, into a locked basement. Later, in the furthest bedroom, the box focused almost entirely on the birthday friend. It said the word "why," and then spoke what turned out to be the name of his uncle, a man who had stopped communicating with the family entirely, despite multiple attempts to reach him, for nearly 3 years. When the birthday friend stepped out of the room, the box began asking where he had gone, asking for him to be brought back. When he returned with his mother, and she walked through the door at that exact moment, our narrator spoke her name clearly and precisely, with their eyes closed, without having been told who she was, simply repeating what they heard. And then the group gathered around the trap door, a stone chamber found in the house just a week before their arrival. A small, enclosed, underground space. The box sent through words, "Stoner, terminal, claustrophobic, watching you, let me out." The narrator pieced it together with the birthday friend afterward. His brother had been in a serious car accident and had been declared terminal upon arrival at the hospital. He had a history with addiction. He was recovering, but he had genuinely been listed as near death. And then, above that trap door, in a moment of absolute clarity that bypassed the noise of the radio frequencies entirely. "Hello, can you hear me?" Sharp, direct, not coming from the box, dropping straight into the narrator's mind from somewhere else entirely. They have not forgotten it since. We are near the end of our journey tonight, but I want to share a few more stories before we close. Because every one of these matters. Every one of these is real to the person who experienced it. A young person growing up in a country home shared several encounters stretching from toddlerhood to their teenage years. As a very young child, they had pointed in terror at a hallway closet and told their mother there was a girl inside with Kool-Aid all over her face. Nothing was there. Their mother was shaken for days afterward. On the drive to their current house, they used to wave at a graveyard they passed regularly, a habit their mother noticed and never quite knew what to make of. Years later, a younger cousin began doing the exact same thing on the same stretch of road. In first grade, working on homework after dark, they walked to their mother and said they could not concentrate because a girl was staring at them through the window. They lived in a rural area with no neighbors and no exterior lights. The window, when their mother checked, showed nothing but darkness. As a teenager, home alone on separate occasions, they saw a pair of translucent legs standing in the hallway, just legs, as if the upper half of a person had been removed, wearing rough-looking trousers and dark shoes. They locked themselves in their bedroom for an hour. Another time, they heard the sound of their little brother screaming outside, only to open the door and find the yard completely empty. From behind the rose bush, heavy footsteps and a strange clicking sound, like a tongue moving rapidly. They slammed the door shut. Their mother eventually had the house blessed, and things quieted after that. A family in a developing country built their home on a hillside without knowing that just 50 yards uphill lay 3 cemeteries and a cremation ground. Their first sign that something was wrong came through a clothesline. The first one, made of coconut fiber, was broken after a night of rain. A stronger plastic rope was put up. In the morning, it had been cleanly sliced through. A woman who passed by that morning, a practitioner of certain rituals, told them they had tied a clothesline across a spirit crossroads. When the father, furious and undaunted, replaced the plastic rope with metal wire, the line held. Metal, the old woman had implied, repels spirits, and the strange events ceased. A medical examiner shared a story from a trip to New Orleans. While visiting a colleague and taking an afternoon detour to a friend's hunting shack in the bayou, she felt watched from the moment she arrived. She felt a cold pressure on her left shoulder. She looked down, nothing there. Her colleague screamed. Both women fled. The narrator fractured her left clavicle in the panic, precisely where the pressure had been felt. Her colleague was mute for 3 weeks. She swears to this day that what she saw was a woman in white with a broken left clavicle, arm hanging loose, mouth open in a silent scream. The colleague now refuses to go within 10 miles of that location. At a family funeral home wake, the narrator fell asleep in a chair at the far end of the room by the door to the next hall. In the night, they opened their eyes and saw 2 dark silhouettes standing before them, an older man in a hat, a younger figure beside him, head resting on the man's shoulder. They asked the narrator to pass a message to someone in the family. The narrator, exhausted and terrified, apologized and said they could not. The shadows vanished. At the cemetery the next day, drained of energy, they sat down on a headstone without thinking. When they realized what they had done and jumped up, they slept for 3 full days, waking only briefly to eat or use the bathroom before being pulled back under. Something had taken their energy. Something from the other side had borrowed what it needed and left them empty. A graduate student in Minnesota lived for a year in an apartment building with what she describes simply as the worst energy she has ever encountered. Everything that could go wrong did. For every person in the building, across the entire year, a steady parade of misfortune arrived unbidden. One night at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, she lay in her room at one end of the apartment and watched a white figure drift slowly through her door, cross the room, and disappear out through the window. Seconds later, her roommate appeared at her door from the complete opposite end of the apartment, separated from her room by a kitchen, a hallway, a dining room, and a living room. He was white as a sheet. He told her that a white figure had floated in through his window, crossed his room, opened his door, and drifted down the hallway. Same figure, same night, moving through the entire apartment from one end to the other. It didn't feel evil, she said, just enormously satisfied with itself. Like whatever had been tormenting them all year had decided to take one final walk through the space it had claimed as its own. She could not wait to move out. And with that, our dear friends, we come to the end of Ghost Week's very first night. Thank you so much for spending these dark hours with us. I hope these stories stayed with you in the very best possible way, the kind that makes you feel alive and aware, and just a little more connected to the mysteries that sit at the edges of our everyday world. Tomorrow night, we come back for haunted house stories. You will not want to miss those. Please make sure you have subscribed and that your notification bell is ringing so you know the moment we return. If any of tonight's stories reminded you of something you have experienced yourself, please share it in the comments below. This community is filled with the most thoughtful, generous, and open-hearted people, and your stories deserve to be heard just as much as anyone else's. What do you think is waiting in those haunted houses tomorrow? Leave your guesses. Your thoughts, your own experiences in the comments. We love hearing from you, every single comment, every single word. A warm and genuine thank you to all of our members and patrons whose names you can see on screen right now. Your support makes all of this possible, and it means more than we can easily say. If you would like to support the work and become part of that group, the link to Patreon and the membership page are right below. There are some wonderful perks waiting for you. And if you want even more stories, right now, tonight, before the darkness lifts, check the link on screen for more, or find us on the Mort's Bedtime Stories podcast for even more spooks delivered straight to your ears. Stay safe, stay warm, stay close to the people you love. And know that sometimes, just sometimes, the ones we have lost find their way back to say good night. Good night, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.